Alright guys, here we go with our lesson today on triangles. I'm going to think that for the most part you guys will probably find out there's a lot of review in this particular lesson, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Make sure you write down the definitions of all the different things we're going to go over. Today is a lot more identification and identifying type things than it is actual, new kind of procedure type things. So there's a lot more identifying. The first one is the most math work as far as algebra that we're going to do today. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the sum of the angle measures in a triangle. And the sum of the angle measures in any triangle is 180 degrees. So if you add up all of the angles of a triangle, you would get all the interior angles of a triangle, you would get 180 degrees in every triangle every time. And with that can help us find missing sides of a triangle. If we know two of the three, then we can use that information to find the third. I do want you guys to practice showing your work on these, is writing them as equations. So what I'm going to do on this one is I have my three angles. This one right here, remember, is 90-degree angle, so you got to remember that. And to find my value of x here, all I do is add up the two I know, and then subtract that from 90. So I wanted to solve that as an equation, so I would do this. X plus 90 plus 48 equals 180. Add up the two numbers on the same side, so x plus 138 equals 180. Subtract 138 from both sides, and we do 180 minus 138, you get 42. And then do not forget your label of degrees. Well, actually, this says, x equals, so x equals 42. Okay, it says x degrees, so x equals 42. The angle measure is 42 degrees, but x equals 42. Okay, and I do want you to practice showing the work. We do have to keep practicing our equations and solving our equations as we go through. That is how you solve an equation to find the missing angle measure. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next slide, so if you need to pause, go ahead. Otherwise, I am moving on. Next, we are going to talk about classifying triangles. There's two ways you can classify a triangle. You can classify a triangle by its angle measures, and you can classify a triangle by its side length. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is by its angle measures. So there's three ways that you can classify a triangle by its angle measures. The first way is an acute triangle. Here's a sample of an acute triangle on the screen. And an acute triangle here's the key, guys. It has three acute angles. Every triangle has two acute angles. Okay, it's what the third angle is that makes it up. In this case, all three are acute, which means acute, remember, is less than 90 degrees. Okay, more than 0, but less than 90. So it has three angles that are less than 90. So when I look on there, if I had a protractor, if I were to look on there, all three of those angles would be less than 90. So that would be an acute triangle. So acute is three angles less than 90. Our second triangle is a right triangle. A right triangle has one right angle in it. You can't have more than one right angle. If you had two right angles, there's your 180 degrees. You have no degrees left for your third angle. So a right triangle has one right angle, and notice the other two angles are acute angles, and they always will be. You have one right angle. That makes it a right triangle. Remember, right, guys, is exactly 90 degrees. And then an obtuse triangle, well, this angle right here, there's our obtuse angle, has one obtuse angle. An obtuse angle, remember, is greater than 90 degrees. So if I have one angle that's greater than 90 degrees, that makes it an obtuse triangle. So we have an acute triangle, a right triangle, an obtuse triangle. And that's how to classify it by its angle measures. Okay? If you need to pause, go ahead. Otherwise, I am moving on to my next slide. And then on the next slide, I'm going to talk about classifying triangles by side lengths. And to classify triangles by side lengths, I want to look at the length of each side. Okay? If I have an equilateral triangle, equilateral, that means I have three congruent sides. All three sides are the same length. And you can see I have 5, 5, and 5. They're all the same length. That makes it a congruent, or an equilateral triangle. Congruent means same length. Now, because all the sides are the same length, this triangle also would have what we call an equiangular triangle because all the angles would be the same. They would all be 60 degrees. So if I have an equilateral triangle, I also know all the angles are 60. That's how it has to be. Okay, so equilateral triangle, all of the three sides are congruent. Our next triangle is an isosceles triangle. An isosceles triangle has at least two congruent sides. So notice that I have my two 9-centimeter lines there, and then the other one is different. So I have two congruent sides. That makes it isosceles. Now, it says at least two, which means an equilateral triangle is also an isosceles triangle. However, when I ask you to classify it, you have to get the most specific name. So for our basis of classifying, an equilateral triangle has three congruent sides, and an isosceles triangle has two congruent sides. Okay, but in word problems and in discussion questions, remember that an equilateral triangle is also an isosceles triangle. So those could be tricky questions that are asked if they are referring to an equilateral triangle, but want you to think of it as isosceles or vice versa. So you got to remember that an equilateral triangle is an isosceles triangle. Okay, but for classifying sense, three congruent sides is equilateral, two congruent sides is isosceles. And then our third triangle for by side lengths is a scalene triangle. And scalene is no congruent sides, and you can see there I have a triangle with three different side lengths. And so that is what a scalene triangle is. Okay? If you need to pause, go ahead. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the last slide. Okay? Example 2 here, just classifying triangles. I want you to classify the triangle by its side lengths and by its angle measure, so you must have two answers here. Okay? When I look at the first one here, I'm going to go by side length first. I'm going to look at the side lengths, and I actually have a 4 centimeter there and a 4 centimeter there. Now notice I put those little tick marks. Sometimes you will see those tick marks in there, and the tick marks are telling you that they are congruent. So sometimes they won't give you the side lengths. They'll use what they call tick marks. And if they have these little tick marks in here, that means that they are congruent. And that way they don't have to write the length. Because I don't really care what the length is. I'm just looking for the same. So since that one has two congruent sides, that would be an isosceles triangle. All right, and then by angle measure, I have my 90-degree angle, so that's going to be a right triangle. So there's my answer. I have to have two answers. Okay? Now for B, I look at my side lengths. No congruent, so that's scalene. Okay? And then I look at my angle measures. Look right here. There's an obtuse angle. It's more than 90. 90 would be coming up here. So that's going to be an obtuse triangle. And that's how I do those. Okay, so again, a lot of identifying on here. And if you need to pause, go ahead. Otherwise, that's going to be it. All right, I thought so. I forgot the S here in isosceles. I had to check that real quick. Isosceles, sorry. Isosceles. Okay, isosceles. Let's get it right. Okay, so let's get there. All right, and that is it for today. Have a great night.